All right, good evening, fine listener, as I blast these audible vibrations into your ear canals. I'm Niles Heckman, and this is a special episode of these tertiary side conversations called Novelty Generators that is very dear to me personally because it's a bit of a War of the Worlds fireside chat, story time telling of the life-transforming events which happened to me personally around the creation of the making of the pilot episode of our documentary series, Shamans of the Global Village. The chat is with Andrea Hartman, Amanda Hodge, and Elfrida Pretorius, and Diesel the dog. Andrea, Amanda, and Elf have all been guests on this podcast before, are dear friends, and amazing, divine, powerful women who certainly have ears to hear regarding these events and their insights. Because fellowship and friends are key, and if you yourself have a lacking of people you can talk to in life about the deeper things of the world, you are not alone. But don't just sit at home. Get out there and go on those quests of glory to find others who are on your similar wavelength, because the more you pilgrimage and make the effort, the more you will be led and thus rewarded. So the four of us occasionally have these group Skype chats we all call our wine and Skypes. And these are just kind of informal, shoot-the-shit, fun conversations. However, for this one, we recorded it many moons ago with the intention of having it one day be released later down the line. And that day has come as I'm ready to essentially let my freak flag fly. Because in wisdom cultures of the past, initiation was key. And there was no way a young person moved into any sort of a real adulthood without confronting the unknown. And this would happen through an experience that would force one to think outside the box and expand. And very unfortunately, we don't have that in the modern world today, and that is one of the main reasons why we are so collectively FUBAR. Because young people don't have a connection to the greater ecology through gnosis or kensho moments. That is the mystery, and instead, they just go off and become college douchebags drinking sanctioned mind-contracting liquid drugs out of red plastic cups. Now, I will preface this chat with a bit of a warning, that not only is it so crazy and somewhat paradigm-crushing, that if you don't want to have your brain slightly melted, then please turn this off now. Also, I bring up a concept that is so wild in the second half of the conversation that if you can stick with it all the way to the end and keep an open mind, I'll be impressed and you will be rewarded with a cookie. So much love, and here we go. So recent developments in our lives have led us to these kind of wine and Skype conversations of excellence. And I think everything that I'm about to tell you is me trying to relay my story as authentically as possible, not to be just about my ego, but just to kind of share the personal experience. Yeah. So we all have a mutual friend, and this story begins with our mutual friend giving me some early insight as to the spatial model of the universe. And all that he said in terms of that is that it's very, very likely not what we've been told, right? He just said kind of put a question mark there, and, you know, we'll get more into that later. I have a friend who's a dear friend and colleague of mine, this gentleman named Rak Razam, and he is a what's called a shamanic facilitator, one of the main elements that he does to make money in commerce. And so what he's done is he's very kind of tied in with the entheogenic and the psychedelic community, and has a podcast called In a Perfect World, and he talks to a lot of people in the community, and it's kind of his world. He's an Australian, and he also facilitates ayahuasca tours in terms of having somebody that's interested in taking a shamanic medicine like ayahuasca. He's a perfect person to contact and help facilitate that experience in terms of like helping. Obviously, with all these things, it's like up to you to do the research, but he's a perfect person to contact and to help somebody in planning the trip and actual, like, you know, going through him to make the whole trip happen, arranging the travel, getting down there. And then he has specific people that he works with that are very reputable medicine people, because as we know, it's very important that you do this with very reputable people. And there is some what's called brujo, dark sorcery going on at times where certain people are not of high moral character, and you don't want to necessarily have experiences with people that aren't like that, aren't honorable. So he had the concept, I think it was maybe about a year ago from the time that we're doing this podcast, to do an episodic show. And the concept for the show is that each episode would follow a specific medicine person working with a specific medicine. And as we know, these things have been around since, you know, the dawn of time. These medicines that are essentially, that's essentially what they are. They're literally just medicines, right? They wake you up from your kind of day-to-day normal reality. So the title of the show is called Shamans of the Global Village, like, Rack conceptualized it. And he and I kind of got it going together. And so his idea, since he's so connected with the community, was to feature basically this very amazing and honorable dude who is, not perfect, but is a very, very reputable, amazing human being named Dr. Octavio Redding, who's a Western-trained physician that I think is a general practitioner, has been trained in the Western sense as a general practitioner in Mexico, and lives down in Hermosillo, Mexico. So he's since then, in his life, through having a very kind of destructive background with narcotics, came to discover the Sonoran desert toad, which is called Bufo alvarius, is the breed of toad, and is working with that toad medicine. And the area that the toad is indigenous to is the Sonoran Desert of Mexico, which stretches all the way from kind of the western side of Mexico all the way up into like Arizona and New Mexico. That region of Mexico is very special because these toads are the only reptile. There's one other type of toad that is a toad in the rainforest that has a entheogen in it, but to our knowledge at this point, the Bufo alvarius is the only reptile other than this one other toad that has a medicine in it. All the other medicines come from essentially plants, right? So that's a very unique characteristic of Bufo alvarius. The toad has these glands, these kind of like pimply looking glands on the back of its neck and on its legs that kind of basically look like these big boils, right? Like if you get a bad burn, it has these big like burn boils on its legs and neck. And the way that this works is basically like you pop these things. He puts them underneath a sheet of glass and squeezes them, and they basically pop like a big gushing pimple onto the glass, and then the medicine comes out in this gooey kind of zitty gunk. And what it is that it's the glands on the toad that are probably in an evolutionary sense designed for keeping other animals from eating it, right? So they call it, I've heard other people refer to it as bufo toxin or bufo. It's basically like so other animals don't eat it. So Octavio's mindset is that these things, or that his idea is that these toads, this medicine was first discovered when we started using fire, many, many millions of years ago, because people would cook the toads and throw them on the fire. And then they, because of the fire cooking the toad, there would be this activation of people in these caves from freaking the toads being cooked. And it was because, of course, this medicine in their glands cooking. This is a little debatable, but the chemical that's in their glands, I've heard some online debate about this. The chemical in the glands is called bufotenine. And when fire hits bufotenine, it turns into what's called 5-MeO-DMT, and that's 5-methoxy and then dimethyltryptamine is the actual chemical name for it. And so what this is basically very likely to this point in time the strongest entheogen on the planet, and it's from a completely natural source, right? It doesn't have to be made in a lab. It doesn't have to be manufactured in any way. As we know, it's like, we call these things medicines because they truly are medicines. I mean, they wake you up from your kind of matrix reality and get you out of the complete construct. And as we very well know in the Western world, we have things that we call medicines coming from the pharmaceutical industry, which is all about making profits as its primary motivation. And of course, there are some benefits of pharmaceutical drugs, but for the most part, it's a bunch of chemicals that they make up and then they run through the FDA, which I think is it's something like you need $800 million to get something through the FDA. So in order to get a patent through the FDA, you have to have a huge financial investment in something. So anything that's natural, that just comes out of a natural source, can't necessarily be patented, because it's like, who's going to spend $800 million to get that through FDA approval to then get a patent on it so then you could sell it. So there's no money in it really in terms of natural entheogens. And as we very well know, there's a lot of stuff probably in the rainforest that are natural medicines that do a phenomenal amount for people that have been intentionally suppressed by Western medicine in a lot of ways because they are so effective. And that's a whole kind of follow the money thing, of course. Right. Octavio's very unique because he has basically he's affiliated with UNESCO, which is part of the United Nations, to actually travel with the medicine. And that's a very unique characteristic because traveling with this type of medicine in our world today is not a very likely thing because of its legality in certain countries. There's 7 countries in the world where this medicine is not legal to bring in. So he can technically travel with it, which makes it a very, unique position for him. Dude, there's Diesel.
Yeah, I'm actually just going to close the window because he hears children and he hears other dogs, and then he thinks is a play date.
No problem.
About to happen. Okay, sorry.
That's okay. So the way to go back to like this stuff, basically, in terms of like the significance of this stuff, Octavio describes it. The way that Rack describes it is that if you take all the entheogens, and there's probably, I think there's something like a dozen different main chemical compounds for entheogens on the planet, and they all have different characteristics, but Rack refers to this particular 5-MeO-DMT as the star on top of the Christmas tree for the power and the unbelievable life-changing element that this chemical compound has. So he calls it the star on top of the Christmas tree. Octavio calls it the top of the pyramid or the center of the X. So you could just see like kind of the significance of this stuff. And this is probably the most special medicine on the planet in terms of where it takes you and the reconnection to source that it embodies within the experience, because it's a very dynamic part of, our awakening. And what's happening on the planet right now is having some of these direct experiences, because in the Western world, what so many people lack is the direct connection to experience. And that's the beauty of shamanism, is that it's all about like your direct experience, right? And so the thing that's very special and unique about this medicine is that, and how much does this tie in with a lot of the material that we talk about, is that not only is it the most probably profound entheogen on the planet, but guess what its experience is like? It's basically a light-based experience. So when you actually take it, you're experiencing something that very much feels like a melting into pure light. And the typical experience that a lot of people have when they take it is that it's what's called the white light void of unity consciousness, and it's very all-encompassing. Like I said, Bufo alvarius, this breed of toad, is very unique because it's basically the only species living on the planet right now, with the exception of, I think, to my knowledge, one other toad in the rainforest that has this compound in it. But I'm sure as we learn more about these things, and as science goes more into this, we will find more reptiles that have a chemical like 5-MeO-DMT in them. I suspect that some of the stuff you see in Asia with dragons and things, all these dragon visions, is because there's probably some snake in Asia that has it. That's kind of what, I would suspect would be found one day. And apparently also, I think in Japan, there's some sort of fish that contains some sort of psychoactive compound around the oceans of Japan, I've heard. What's so special about DMT, and of course it's dimethyltryptamine. DMT is dimethyltryptamine, and tryptamine has trip in the word, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what's so special about DMT is that it's indigenous to all mammals, right? So these entheogens are neurotransmitters, and our bodies have a full delivery system in them from the brain throughout the body. So it's built into our retware, right? And it's in many plant species, DMT. It's in a lot more plants than you'd think. There's a list of plants that are known now that have it in them, but as time goes on, I'm sure that we will find it even more plants, like we'll find more animals that have this in them. And I've even talked to certain people that suspect that it may very well end up being in all plants, for all we know, once we kind of really boil it down. And so again, tryptamine is there's a unique family of entheogens that are the tryptamines, and I suspect also that because of the endogenous nature of this, when you dream, that's what's happening, is you're having essentially tryptamine dreams, right? Because you're having this endogenous release of tryptamines in your system. And your third eye chakra, which represents an activated pineal gland, is a representation of where the tryptamines come from your system, is that they're secreted by your pineal gland. Mm-hmm. So let me read you a little something that Rack wrote, which is the part of the foreword to Octavio's book, which is called The Toad of Dawn. So this kind of gives you a little insight into Rack's character. Between my eye, my pineal literally pops, and it bursts the golden white seed juice of light. The liquid is pure love, unconditional love. It becomes a waterfall that thunders down my throat, and I'm drowning on the inside. Drowning in the purest of pure white love that is all there is. And I remember, know thyself, I remember where I am, what it is. A cascade of 5-MeO-DMT washes through my mind, my body, my soul, releasing, remembering. My shaman brothers are here, all of them holding me. Diesel.
Diesel wants some.
Diesel's cheering us on.
Yeah.
Diesel's so cute, man.
I just want to give him something that he can do, and then I can. Okay, here we are.
No problem.
We are talking about like a waterfall of
love,
universal love, and he's like, "Yeah, I want in on that."
Okay, I'll pick it up.
That was really beautiful.
Yeah, it's beautiful, isn't it? So he says,
yes.
My shaman brothers are here, all of them holding me up and supporting me joyfully, welcoming and holding the mission I am on and we are on, and it is the fluid translinguistic yes, yes, yes. This is the moment. Join us. A lifetime of wounds, insecurities, broken lines. My energetic template are holding in this crucible of and reforging anew. And the universe opens up and I drink it in. This single superglued gestalt consciousness that both is everything interconnected and enters and speaks through me. Glassolalia space love. And that sound, this is how you navigate. This is how the universe steers. This is how we get where we need to be. So, yeah,
wow.
Beautiful. So that shows now people that haven't been in a shamanistic experience may not understand, and it's good to kind of note this, is that's the significance of when you're in a shamanistic experience is the singing. So when you take a medicine and then you're in a circle with a shaman, his singing is the guiding light for the experience, right? It's like you're on a roller coaster, and if you don't have somebody there to shamanize it, I mean, it's kind of like you're going into Russian roulette, right? Like you're leaving your body, because we know we're not our bodies, and you're going into some other dimensional space. And you can have a beautiful experience, but you don't know what's going to happen. So if you have a shaman guiding you through that experience, it's like he's steering the track of the roller coaster. And of course, we all have our own will to navigate the space, but with a shaman also guiding you, it can be such an empowering, amazing experience. And if you put a intent into it, like I want to heal something specific, that's what the shamanizing can really help with, like if you have some sort of wound or sickness. So in terms of them being endogenous, there's in terms of dream time also with tryptamine dreams, there are darkroom retreats that I know indigenous people have been doing for many millions of years, and this is where the story starts to get really interesting. So there are darkroom retreats that some cultures do and that you can still do today that go for 14 days and 14 nights. What happens when you're essentially in pure darkness for 14 days and 14 nights is that your body's in the dark so long that it starts to produce large amounts of melatonin. Mm-hmm. And that aligns with your natural circadian rhythms of going asleep and being awake. Right. And melanin is related to melatonin, which is related to light, right? So after that melatonin, your body starts to produce pinealine, which is derived from the pineal gland, and that is an MAO inhibitor. So ayahuasca is a brew that has 1 part MAO inhibitor and 1 part a plant that has the DMT in it, right? So that the MAO inhibitor allows it to be active in your stomach. So your body is naturally now creating an MAO inhibitor just by being in darkness. Wow. So the MAO prepares the body for the acceptance of the tryptamines. So Dana, is a lucid dreamer, our friend Dana, that has very high levels probably of endogenous tryptamines. Mm-hmm. And so I wonder if she took an MAO inhibitor, if that could mean she just could almost instantly trip balls, right? Because she has such a very high release of tryptamines just endogenously from her pineal gland. And we all do, right? But we have certain things culturally in terms of toxins in our environment that limit the amount of tryptamines our pineal glands create. And of course, there's a lot of pineal calcification in our culture today. Right. And a major argument of that is from fluoridation of water. Yeah, and so I bet in the past that when our pineal glands were essentially kind of firing on more cylinders than they are now, that the pineal is a major element of our actual physical evolution. And we all know that it's all about kind of more of our conscious evolution in stair steps in consciousness. But a physical evolution element is obviously very tied in with the pineal gland and, of course, our chakra systems, which for most people don't come online at all. So why do we do this? Why do we smoke this medicine, right? Well, we do it, Octavio says we do it, of course, for two reasons. And one is for healing, because we have a very kind of hack and slash, short-term profit, false society that's all about trashing the environment. Right. And the other main reason we do it is for the expansion of consciousness. So if you don't know that we're trashing our planet, and you don't even know what consciousness is, you don't really see a reason or understand why you'd even want to do these things. So Octavio credits the toads as a major part of our evolutionary leap because of exactly this type of stuff. So halfway through this darkness experience, your body, when you're naturally in a dark state, starts to endogenously release the tryptamines. And there are two types of DMT. One is called NN-DMT, and the other is called 5-MeO-DMT. And again, the Bufo alvarius has 5-MeO in it, and the 5-MeO is the light experience. So NN is typically very visual, and a lot of people have described it as pure magic, NN, and it being kind of a reality channel switch visually. I've also heard it be called the what the fuck drug. Like you smoke it and like
yeah, I like that one.
you love it, don't you? Like you smoke it and it's literally like within a very short amount of time, like complete alien reality channel switch. A lot of entheogenic experiences are very kind of lighter than you would think, and you kind of feel like you kind of felt something, but you're not sure. And it's like, okay, I think something happened, but I'm not sure, and I'm not quite sure what happened. But like with certain people have attested to NN-DMT when it's in its smokable form, like literally just absolutely changing reality right in front of your eyes, and it being a very short experience. So in this darkroom retreat, the next step that happens in your body is the release of NN-DMT endogenously. So you will literally start seeing things in the dark, right? Let's say we're at day 9 of 14. You start seeing things in this darkness retreat. And then after the NN-DMT, later, your body will endogenously release 5-MeO-DMT. So it's this tryptamine flush cascade chemical cocktail that's rebooting your whole system. Like mentioned before, if the 5-MeO is a light experience, again, how much does that tie in with our esoteric mystery school material? And Octavio describes the medicine as pure light, pure love, pure consciousness, pure everything, because a lot of the times it's a melting into the unified field. So here's the trick of this thing, right, is that endogenously, if you go into a darkness retreat, what begins in darkness will end in light. So,
oh, wow. I love that.
Yeah. So again, it's melatonin to pinoline to bufotenine to NN-DMT to 5-MeO-DMT. And I should credit a gentleman named Dan Schreiber who has talked about this before. So if I've screwed up any of these details, Dan could probably credit this better than I can.
You know what, Niles? You know what I am... Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going... I am... You know what fascinates me is that this substance is found in a toad.
Yep.
Like, why there?
Exactly. You have to ask yourself.
It reminds me of that fairy tale, too, of the princess who kisses toads, and then transforms. Or
there's a thought. There's transformation.
Yeah, exactly. And that's like Joseph Campbell material, right? Where like we know that at every stage of history, like the assholes won. So because the assholes won, like they rewrote they rewrote history so much that we don't really know what our real history is. So this is like the Joseph Campbell material where myth, what really happened didn't get told, so it all goes into myths, right? Yeah. So all these fairy tales of elves and spirits and fairies and then like kissing toads are probably look to myth to tell the real history and not the history books. Right. So yeah, very, very perceptive, Andrea.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. I'm up on my fairy tales.
So our mutual friend has a reading list that I'm sure a lot of you have gone through, if not all the material, but a lot of the material. And on his reading list is a book called DMT, The Spirit Molecule, which was written by a gentleman named Rick Stratzman, who did a lot of experiments with NN-DMT. And the pineal gland is described by some people in the book even as a vestigial third eye. So in certain reptiles, it actually has like a cornea and a lens, I guess, and basically very tied in with spiritual activation. Again, this is the kind of the separation of shamanistic practice, direct experience practice versus theology or orthodoxy, which is all about externalizing your experiences. So that's kind of a major separation, is looking at the good information in a lot of the religious texts from a third eye perspective. And until you have the third eye perspective, people don't draw the details out of them in terms of the allegory in them. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there's this fabulous quote from a gentleman named Terence McKenna, who was a psychedelic philosopher. And he said that the first 1,000,000 years of religion were called shamanism until weasels replaced direct experience with dogma.
Yeah. The best quote.
Yeah. Yeah.
Dead on.
And then, we all know that in the Vatican, there's a lot of symbolism that acknowledges the pineal gland, and the pine cone in the Vatican courtyard is very synonymous with the pineal gland. And of course, if you look at the Pope's staff, whatever that staff, that Star Wars outfit he wears, and the staff has a pine cone on it.
Star Wars outfit, that's the best.
bunch of guys standing around in Star Wars outfits.
Yeah.
So, and that's the thing, is like, I understand the hierarchy, and I understand the massive amounts of huge financial investments in building these mega locations around theology, but you don't need, in order to have a real spiritual experience, you could go to a little tiny old man in a hut in the rainforest. It's like, you don't need any of that stuff to have this kind of pineal activated experience. Indigenous tribes drink ayahuasca, and there's another brew other than ayahuasca that is very much less heard about, that's called yahe. And yahe, the difference between yahe and ayahuasca is ayahuasca has the MAO inhibitor is one aspect of it. The chacruna leaves, and then the Banisteriopsis caapi vine has the chacruna leaves are the MAO inhibitor, and then the Banisteriopsis caapi vine has the NN-DMT in it. But this other brew, yahe, is unique, and it's rare. It's much less common to find because it has both. I don't know what the other component is in it, but it's got 3 components in it. And the third component is a 5-MeO-DMT component rather than just an NN-DMT component. That's a pretty, unique element to yahe, and that's talked about within certain tribes in the Amazon. So back to the show, we basically go down to Mexico to shoot the first episode of this show with essentially the most powerful entheogen. It's like, why not start with the most powerful one or the most life-changing one as the first episode of the show?
Right.
Well, Niles, Yahe is very much like Yahweh.
Yahweh? Oh, yeah. So we go down to Mexico to shoot the pilot episode of this show, this low budget, nothing budget show featuring Octavio as the first, subject for the first episode. And it's funny because we went down literally like the day after this massive this Mexican drug lord had broken out of prison.
Oh my gosh.
So his name is El Chapo, right? Is the name of this drug lord. And, so we go down there, we're shooting the show around the area of the Sonoran Desert, around Hermosillo, Mexico, where Octavio lives. Since Rack is a shamanic facilitator, he had brought Western guests down to also experience the ceremony, and that was some of them, paid to come along. And so they were Westerners. It's essentially a bunch of white people going down to experience this amazing medicine. And, of course, the thing about shooting this show is that I only speak English, and Rack is from Australia, so he only speaks English. So we don't want to make it this. The last thing we ever want to do is add to like whitewashing Hollywood. Right. But it is a show focused around Westerners reconnecting with this indigenous medicine practice. Because as we bring up in the show, we used to be a global shamanic culture in the past, and that is what's happening on the planet right now, is that things are changing. The consciousness is rising among some people, and we are rediscovering the lineage of the beauty of shamanism and the direct experience that it has. So since we were once a global shamanic culture, we will then again become a global shamanic culture. The indigenous people that live in this area where the toads are primarily living are called the Seri. And so just like kind of on an apple, you talk to Seri. so they're named the Seri people, and the toads are basically on their land. And they have an island off the coast of their land called Tiburon Island, which is a natural reserve. And the Seri people had forgotten about the toad, right? They had lost the lineage to the toad. And if we are on cycles of time, like a sine wave of time, they had at one point in a higher state of Mexico had been using the toad but had forgotten about them. So Octavio had rediscovered this connection with the toad because of his substance abuse, and the toad has saved his life twice. Once from a spider bite. He got bit by a brown recluse spider, which is a very dangerous spider. And the toad, the toad cured him of that. And then the other is because he was so hooked on some sort of terrible I think it was, meth or some shit. And so he was hooked on either some narcotic, either coke or crack. I think it was crack cocaine. He literally was hooked on crack for a couple of years, and the toad just cold turkey cut his crack addiction.
Wow.
Yeah.
Jeez.
Yeah. And so he has gone into the tribe as a Western doctor and is now working with the toad medicine and has cured like a huge amount of the tribe from their addictions because of the current state of Mexico. Mexico being at kind of quite a low state right now, which is very sad. And so because of the cartels and whatnot in Mexico, the tribe had been very hooked on a lot of, junk narcotics. And so Octavio has gone through a huge amount of the tribe and cured them from their ailments of the toad medicine. And as he's curing them, the elders from the village, this is part of the experience, which we'll get into, start having these chants come up, these singing chants, these shamanistic chants that were a lineage of their history, that they started remembering that they had been working with the toads. And so then Octavio's practice now is that he's gained these chants from the indigenous people that were once working with the toads.
Wow.
Yeah, amazing. We go out to shoot the episode, and we're shooting around Octavio's house. We're shooting on the coast. We're shooting within the Siri village itself. And, the Siri are obviously, it's just kind of, I don't want to say it's a small little dumpy village in Mexico, but it's, when you go down there, you'll see that it's a beautiful natural landscape, but the community definitely is not at its high point. And we had talked about this, that Mexico is absolutely ripe with entheogens in terms of these tryptamines in the toads. It also has what's called Salvia divinorum, which is a very standard looking plant. It has peyote, and it has psilocybin mushrooms. So Mexico is like ground zero for entheogens. Totally. And so we suspect, and Octavio has talked about this, that Mexico in past versions of time, like in the Mayan and the Aztec times, or even pre-Aztec times, it's very likely that Mexico was probably one of the highest, most enlightened place on the planet. And right now it's obviously going through its down point. But because these medicines are very local to Mexico, it's very likely that Mexico was just this very high antiquity, high Renaissance place in the past. Basically, like, getting into the experience, the way that we set it up is that we shot the show over several days, a documentary style show, and on the last day of the show, this island that's off the coast of the Seri community, which is on the coast, kind of, if you look at Baja California, the opposite side of Baja California, the west coast of Mexico is approximately where this area is. So we're shooting the show, and on the last day of the show, we have a ceremony with the medicine that is going to be kind of the big crescendo of the episode of the show. And of course, this is all just documenting never before seen material, because these toad ceremonies are even way more intense than an ayahuasca ceremony. And of course, this is not a recreational experience. You don't go through this to have a fun time. You go through it, of course, for two reasons. One is for healing, and one is for the expansion of consciousness. But the actual experience can be very, very intense. And, you don't mess around with this stuff because it's very serious stuff, and it reserves huge respect. So a massive part of the respect of this is having a proper set and setting. So on the last day, we go out to the island with Octavio and with the elders from the village, some of whom had rediscovered this chants and lineage, to this amazing reserve, this beautiful location. So, I mean, talk about amazing, perfect set and setting to do this, to have this experience. Is like we're here at the community with the elders. It's not like we're doing this in our scuzzy, San Francisco apartment or something.
Yeah, right.
and we did it in the second half of the day. And so the evening times, it's funny, I have a synchronicity with this, where all of my most kind of profound experiences have happened around evening times with these gorgeous textured vanilla skies. Right. And so if you look at the latest poster for Transmutation, you probably know where this sky came from, because that is literally what the sky looked like. So, of course, my experiences are affecting the work, right? Because I'm very drawn to these skies that you see on frames of a lot of the stuff that I do. And there's a Japanese anime director named Makoto Shinkai who's like obsessed with textured skies as well, and has these beautiful like sunset skies. And so I always find that synchronistically somehow, whenever I have these amazing medicine experiences, of course, it's phenomenally good to do them out in nature. I just happen to be under this beautiful sunset sky, right? And our mutual friend has talked about ley lines, which are, of course, these special energy grids on the planet, or some call them dragon lines. And so I'm nearly positive that this one area where we went on Shark Island, this small little island, this reserve, had a down vortex where two ley lines connect right where we're doing this ceremony. So think of the significant nature of that, right? And this is sacred land, this is sacred indigenous land. And my most profound experiences have not been closed-eye experiences, because a lot of the times when you do these things, what's more of an internal experience behind closed eyelids is a huge element. But my personal most profound experiences have been open-eyed experiences, where you have this kind of virtual reality type experience where reality just basically fundamentally changes around you with your eyes open.
Wow.
Yeah. Octavio generally has you look at the sun when you smoke it, and he's kind of got this cowboy element where he wants you to stand up like a warrior. And because, there's a lot of talk about the sun and it not being what we think it is. And I've even heard people refer to the sun as being essentially a dimensional converter, not necessarily a big ball of gas in the sky, but more of a dimensional converter, and essentially like kind of a Stargate where the the souls transit in through the sun and then leave through the sun. So it's basically like the large, you can think of it as like the Large Hadron Collider of hyperspace. So it's like there's your worm tunnel exit. You're either coming in or you're going to exit. So Octavio has you look at the sun when you smoke it, because it's like, get ready, that's where you're going. Right?
Wow.
Yeah. When you smoke it, I mean, visually, everything oftentimes, I'll talk about my experience versus what kind of the typical experience that people give testimonials of. And there's a lot of testimonials online about like people's experiences, because again, when you do this, it's the most profound experience of your life. It's like, you can't not help but try and share this information. And it's hard to share it because it's difficult to even put the experience into a linguistic box, because it's like the Matrix, right? Where it's like nobody can really tell you about it other than just trying to subjectively share their own experience.
Right.
But ultimately you need to experience it for yourself. So when I smoked it, everything went very watercolorish, and it's kind of like reality just went into the microwave for 15 seconds, where everything looks just slightly melted. And Rack talks a lot about this where he calls it the melt. Right, where like everything starts melting slightly. And usually what people start seeing is they start seeing this melting, and then everything starts going into these bright, overexposed, like gold fractals. And, you see sacred geometries and then slowly that kind of just becomes a complete overexposure of your reality, where, again, Octavia describes it as pure consciousness, pure energy, pure vibration, pure light, pure love. But I didn't get that myself. I had a bit of a different experience, which is unusual. The type of thing with this is that Octavio has a specific breakdown that he gives to people for the general experience most people go through. And I'll say what the breakdown is here now. It says, a dissolution into fractals and an evaporation of the sense of self. So this is his kind of standard steps that most people go through. These are shared commonalities. A dissolution into fractals and an evaporation of the sense of self. The sensation of being transported by white light at the speed of light elsewhere, out the Stargate, most likely. That's my suspicion. A melting into oneness, feeling of love for the principles that organize the universe. The sense that all of life boils down to that space within time or without time, regardless of time. A complete dissolution of ego and emerging into absolute consciousness, right? So like you have this visual experience, you overexpose, you melt away, and then you're gone. Your body doesn't exist anymore. And it's just a flood of meaning, so of absolute egoic loss of self. And then there's a coming back. And so the coming back steps are a reconstruction of all the parts that constitute the individual. So a reconstruction of your ego, a repossession of the physical body, your lowest form, which of course, is your lowest form, your physical body, since you're not your body. And we all know our bodies will rot and die someday, but we will continue on because our souls are eternal. And then a period of intermediary resonance between the astral planes and a return to your normal state down in terra firma. And then after that is almost the hardest part, as I just described those steps, which is a reintegration back into society, which is what so many people struggle with. And again, Rack as a facilitator has a nice community that he's set up, and I know that other facilitators do this, where it's like you need people to talk to about this shit, because you go through this, you pop out of the matrix and then you're back in the matrix and you're like, who the fuck do I talk to?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Your crazy friends on Skype.
Your crazy friends on Skype. Oh, the craziness has not even begun, my dear. So
That's us, by the way, world, the crazy ones.
Yeah, stay crazy, my dear. Stay crazy, my dear. Okay, so I'll break this down in terms of like the steps of my experience. So the first step, and this is kind of like layers of the onion, right? So the first step, I basically shot the ceremony for the show. And of course, this is never before seen footage of what the ceremony was. It'll be in the first episode of the show. But I, at the very end of the shooting of basically half a dozen other people going and having these incredible experiences, which will be on screen for the show, never before seen footage. I smoked the medicine myself at the very end. And so the first step, stage one, is like what happens visually, which again is this watercolor melt feel. And I not only combined with a melt feel, I had this very dome-ish feel above me, right? And then so I had this feeling that there was this dome space above me, which was slightly melting. It's like somebody had put the microwave on for 10 seconds. It all starts melting into watercolor. Think of like Monet. Right,
wait, so and now your eyes open at this point. Still,
yes,
right?
And again, I'm eyes open. I never close my eyes. So that's a good point to mention, is that I never did close my eyes. It's like you see reality as it is, and then imagine reality morphing from standard visual to like slightly Monet melted reality. Yeah. And then feeling just suddenly that I feel like all of a sudden I have a moment of clarity that there's this dome above me, and that from the top of the dome is essentially like a wormhole funnel from the top, vector of the dome space that looks down at the top of the sky. So it's like I'm in the center of the cyclone of a tornado, right? And then here's Octavio standing around me singing. And so I start seeing Octavio in terms of like his abstract watercolored self. And then audibly, everything goes very echoey and like he's kind of smeared away, both visually and audibly. And so he's again starts all that happens is you lose him visually, but you keep his internal guiding light, which is his singing. And Rack has a great description for his experience where he describes it as like a Photoshop scene. Suddenly reality breaks into a Photoshop scene of like 8 trillion layers. So that's kind of visually what's happening in terms of what you see. And then for the typical experience, like I just mentioned, is then a overexposure into pure whiteout, right? And then oftentimes people, if they take too much, you can't really overdose from this unless you have some sort of horrible, physical condition where you have some very sensitive heart and you took ludicrously too much and it did something to your heart or something like that. I've never heard of anybody overdosing on this stuff, but if you do take more than you need, typically you'll just go to this whiteout and you'll forget the experience. So then the second stage of what's happening in the experience, and the experience only lasts like 5 or 10 minutes, right? So all these steps I'm giving you happen in a very short amount of time. Right. So the second layer of the experience
is open eyes, right?
Yeah, with open eyes the whole time. And that's what was very unique for me, is that I didn't go into this whiteout and I didn't feel like I blasted through the Large Hadron Collider of hyperspace. I didn't feel like I left into another dimension, right? I stayed down in terra firma. So the second stage that happens is you have a torrent of thoughts, which are essentially coming from the astral, right? If there's a dome above us and I feel there's this dome suddenly, there's a download from this center of the cyclone that are just thoughts coming from the astral. And I'm standing there staring at the sun, and I hold my arms out like a warrior. And again, Octavia's like, you are a warrior. So I'm holding my arms out and I'm leaning back and I'm opening my mouth, and this torrent of thoughts are coming down, basically down into my mouth, down into my throat. And you have just basically, in terms of thoughts, just things popping into your head. Suddenly you just have all these things popping in your head. It's like these moments of clarity, these moments of realization. Like, you know how we all have our moments of like profound realization when we're like waking up in the morning, because probably when you wake up in the morning, you're least you, because you've been astral traveling or you've been dreaming. Right. And so you have there's Diesel. And then you have a thought like in the shower where you suddenly just something pops into your head, which is very likely maybe like, I know Elf's talked about your feminine subconscious mind just tapping to something. And so you're essentially getting these.
What? I think I'm going to.
You want to pause for a second?
I'm just gonna go Cajun because he's impossible. So just carry on, guys.
You want me to pause? We could pause.
Yeah, let's pause.
We'll pause. This is too good to.
Yeah, this is too good. I could actually use a potty break. So
yeah, you want to take a potty break?
We'll take a potty break.
Break.
Yes, this is such a good. This is like. So I just realized I am like, if I could get inside of my iPad, I would. I'm leaning so close. I'm like so intrigued.
Oh, we haven't even gotten to the good stuff.
I know. I'm like, can I get inside of the experience through my screen?
Niles, what you said about how like you can't. It just reminded me earlier when you said that about how this is an indescribable experience, and it's difficult to share that with people because it's so experiential. Yeah. That's exactly like what I was sharing with you and Elfrida the other time we talked. It's the exact same way. There's like, if I could just plug you in to my experience, it would be so much more profound, because my words don't even, I mean, it's powerful even just to hear it in words, but it doesn't even touch like what it actually was,
Yeah. Our development in our language allows us to become, if we are all becoming amateur philosophers, we start having the language to describe things. But even the language, it's like it's hard to put these things in a linguistic box. Right. If you're really good at describing them, right? So that's the tough part.
You have like the reference of like Monet, because how do you just, that's pretty clear, but like how else would you say that? It's so difficult. Yeah. And like when I was telling you, like having things happen at simultaneous times, like multi-dimensional things that are simultaneous, it's there is no reference point for that in your day-to-day life,
Yeah.
Your drive to Starbucks is not multi-dimensional normally. It's hard to explain.
Okay. I'm back from my potty break.
We're all good? Yeah. Okay. So I was just saying, so like Elf has mentioned in the past, our subconscious mind, our feminine subconscious mind, if that's the mind that taps to source or taps to the astral, it's like you're suddenly just getting all these thoughts in your head, right? Like you're suddenly having profound thought after profound thought after profound thought. So it's like, do you want your computer to be connected to the internet, or do you not want to just not be connected to the internet? What's called an air-gapped computer, where you're just locked out. So it's better to be connected to the internet, right? So it's suddenly like you get connected to the astral internet, and you start just getting downloads of information. And so that's kind of what your mind is doing, right? And so then the third component is what you're physically doing. So this is stage 2 where the conversation goes weird. So the third component is what you're physically doing. So I'm standing there with my arms up, leaning back, feeling like this data is coming down through this like vortex into my throat. And I start getting this activation in my fingertips, and I start having this information that's downloaded into me. My lips and tongue just start doing this weird talking, and it sounds very alien. I start essentially speaking this language that sounds very alien and kind of, I don't want to say reptilian, but almost reptilian. And my first download that popped into my mind is that the toads were some ancient alien species from many billions of years ago, and they landed on Earth, and that they're secretly this advanced race, and they're giving me their toad language.
That's brilliant. I love that.
It's probably not as like sci-fi wonky, like B-level sci-fi as that. It's probably much more sophisticated than that. But Octavia and I have talked about like how this literally may be some sort of ancient language. Right. Mm-hmm. So I'm starting to suddenly get this ancient language that I'm speaking, and my fingers are turning and activating. And basically, I start actually moving my hands and arms so much, and I start having these kind of spiral shapes that start happening in my wrists, and my fingers are just super activated and tingling and going back and forth. And basically, there's a component to this where suddenly I start these dancings, these moves, these mudra poses, where these kind of activated quick mudras where my hands are rotating around in these kind of yin-yang figure 8 infinity symbols. And so that starts speeding up faster and faster and faster as I'm doing this language stuff. And basically, in Philip K. Dick said in Valis, which is, of course, the vast active living intelligence system, he says, phylogenetic memory is the memory of the species, unlike our own memory, which is ontogenic memory. And phylogeny is recapitulated in ontogeny. So that means that basically, like, your memory is you have your own memory, and then you suddenly can get the memory of the species as the whole. So I literally at that point in time realized that I had done this dancing in past lives.
Oh, wow.
Like,
Oh wow, yeah.
yeah, I had realized that this is something that my soul had done in India fucking 27,000 years ago.
Right.
And so the individual contains the memory of their race. So in the dream, I see where a full life is capable of, and it's not what I really have, but it lingers hours after I wake up, right? So you have these dreams, and you dream something, and you're like, wait a minute, what was that? Was that mine, or was that somebody else's, right? And so a crucial component to smoking this stuff is that there's a gentleman in Oregon named Martin Ball who is an expert on DMT, and he has this term that he calls mirrored bilateral symmetry. And so that is this kind of like moving this mudra dance movings of your arms and swinging them around and whatnot. And I know that, Amanda and I have chatted about how sometimes when she sun gazes, she suddenly goes into these mudra, or at least it feels like you want to go into these mudra poses, right?
Yeah, no, I do it. And it's kind of strange. Like I've not, it's not one that, the ones that I'm doing now are ones that I've learned, I would say, or remembered during sun gazing. They're not ones that I like saw in a book.
Exactly. So you're gazing at the sun, you're getting some sort of pineal activation a little bit, maybe in small dose, and then suddenly you're just wanting to go into these like meditative mudra poses. So if the toad is like rocket fuel condensed version of getting that blast of sun gazing, I'm suddenly going into this crazy rapid fire mudra stuff and speaking this weird alien reptilian language.
Your toad language,
Your toad language. So you got to have reference points on this stuff before somebody describes it. Otherwise you just think like, what the fuck?
I do my sun gazing, which is hilarious. I hide behind these shrubs, behind this building near a cornfield by my house. So I would love to have something like that happen, because I'm sure all the residents in the elderly home behind me are like, what is that crazy girl doing?
Right. Now, here's the thing. Get this. So that I am dancing around and I'm doing these mudra poses, and as I'm dancing around, I get very active. And a lot of people, when they smoke this stuff, just basically fall down. They just kind of turn into this flimsy corpse and then fall down. And Octavio helps you so you don't, hurt yourself. So they lie down and they go into this whiteout. I didn't have the whiteout. I go into this crazy dance.
You're dancing.
I remember everything. I remember practically everything. I'm dancing around in this crazy rapid fire like break dance of these mudra poses, speaking this weird alien language. And then I start moving my hands in these weird like clicky poses that look the whole thing felt very ancient and alien.
Yeah.
And I could affect things in my reality, right? Like I could look at a star off in the horizon, and I could, through a series of my vocal tones in this language and my positions of my hands, because it's all vibration, right? Like the Hermetic principles, one of them is vibration. All of this is just vibratory, right? Like the audible things that you do and the visual and the physical things you do with your hands combined into this kind of language where then I could affect reality, which is much more palpable and malleable than we think. So I could say a few things, and then I could twist my fingers and point at something off in the distance, and I sure as shit felt like a light would turn off in the distance. Or I could go up to a tree. During my experience, I went up to a tree and I started stretching the knot in the wood open and feeling like there was
my goodness.
like there was a galaxy in the knot, and stretching it and stretching it, and then it would open up into this like wormhole in the knot, right? So very, very, very profound experience.
Gosh. Please tell me that somebody recorded that for you.
Oh, there's video of this.
Oh, good.
Okay, are we going to see that?
You certainly can. Sure, I'll give you guys
movie night at the Heckman.
I'll give you a preview of it. Sure.
I would love to see that.
I only have one disclaimer with it, is that I'm in the video. I'm wearing douchebag Abercrombie and Fitch shorts.
That's what you're concerned about.
So don't think
that's the concern here. It's not that you're opening wormholes in trees, but it's the shorts that you're wearing while you do it.
It's my douchebag fraternity shorts.
Yeah, I won't repeat any of our offline conversation, but we've already shared that with you, Niles. So we're cool that you were wearing shorts, whatever.
No, it's just the nature of these goofy like shorts I had that are like legacy of what I would wear in college. You know, you look back at your fashion and you're like, I can't believe I wore that 3 years ago. ago.
I'm still shopping there for my daughter, so it's totally fine. I'm kind of numb to that, to that store.
So get this.
It's a phase we must all pass through.
So this verbal stuff that I'm doing with my mouth is called xenolinguistics. And xenolinguistics is the study of ancient and alien languages, or I guess unknown languages, which are known to go through people at times, where people have suddenly just some sort of weird language go through them. I got very much a sense from the experience that this language was downloaded into me from outside the dome, from the astral, right?
Yeah.
And so in terms of other thoughts that came into my mind, I realized that we are incarnated here down on this material plane, but our real selves exist out in the astral outside of the dome. And so we're like our little avatars down here in the little chessboard for our real selves that are existing out in astral space.
Oh, wow.
So in terms of this symmetry, which Martin Ball calls it, in the Vedic poses, we all know that many gods are portrayed with multiple arms, right?
Right. Yes.
So ancient works, as far back as you go, especially Hindu gods from the East, such as Shiva, Brahma, Vishnu, Kali, many will claim, these gods have all these arms, right? You know where I'm going with this one. So many will claim that that's because of the deity's immense power or the ability to perform several acts at the same time. And I think that in my research of looking into this, they really have very, very different meanings. But I propose that a major meaning for those Vedic gods from the East, and they all have the third eye dots, not feathers, on their forehead, showing an activated pineal gland. I propose that those arms are because of this, are because of tryptamine symmetry, are because of this dancing that you get when you smoke DMT. So, that it's a signal of this crazy activated arm thing that you go through. And so I propose that this is illustrative of an activated pineal gland, just like the dots on the foreheads, and the arms are an extension of that, but nobody really knows that because very few people have had this profound experience.
Had that experience, yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So then the fourth layer of it is kind of the events that take place during this experience. So again, all this stuff is happening in 5 minutes, folks.
Right. Yeah.
So then the fourth step of this is as I'm dancing around the events that take place. And I got a sense when I'm dancing around that the people that I was with were actually a galactivated team of superheroes, right? That basically all of the people I was there with were there for a very specific reason. It wasn't like it was all haphazard and no reason. And that they all knew that this was going to happen to me and that I wasn't there to shoot the show. I was there to have this experience and that they all knew this was going to happen. So do you ever have these moments, like I know Amanda's mentioned this, where it's like every moment in your life was leading up to that moment? So it's like every step along the way that brought you to that moment was leading up to that one moment. So I met these people just to, I wasn't there to shoot a show. I didn't meet Rack to meet Rack. I met Rack so that I could one day lead up to have this experience. Right. So talk about when I talk about like synchronicities and the synchronicities just like funneling in, it's this type of thing that happens because during the experience, I did two more things where I went up to the back of Rack and I did one of these like galactic wormhole stretching things on his back. Kind of like in Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom where that guy pulls the dude's heart out.
Yeah.
I did one of those to the back of Rack where I felt like there was some sort of disease in his back. Whoa. And when I did that to him, he was ready for it. And it was like he knew it was going to happen. And his wife was there too, and I did it to her. I did it around her, and it looks really weird on the video. And the video looks weird. Again, the video doesn't do justice to the internal experience. But I was dancing around, and I went around, and I did it to Jueli, his partner, as well. It was like we've all done this before in a previous life, and they knew the special thing that I was going to do when I took the toad medicine, and they knew that not only was I there to have the experience, but I was there to heal them from these ailments that they had.
Wow.
Right?
Wow.
Yeah. So it's just such a mind fuck. It's really astonishingly a mind bender. And it made it all also feel like reality is all a setup, right? So we've talked about this, and we'll get into this with the realization and that where I started this all. But there's a quote from Shakespeare that says, in terms of reality being like a Truman Show dynamic, I oftentimes talk about how reality feels more like a Truman Show Groundhog Day dynamic, where reality is all a setup, and it's all a setup for you.
Yeah.
And then it's all being repeated until you figure it out and get it right and can get out of here.
Yeah.
So there's a quote from Shakespeare that says, all the world's a stage and all the men and women merely players.
Yeah.
They all have their
Yeah.
exits and their entrances, and one man in his time plays many parts, right? So that's from Shakespeare. Yeah. So that was just like suddenly realizing that all these people I was there with, I had known before, and I'd known them for a long time. And a few of them I just met for that trip. But like they all, the thing that was so weird is that they all treated what I was doing like, oh yeah, we knew he was going to do that.
It's totally normal.
Isn't that amazing? Like
I
none
Saw
of
that coming.
Yeah, go
I
ahead.
have a question for you, Niall. So, there's a lot of, we often, about being present and mindful, will look at ourselves as also having a separate part of us that's the witness. So just in our day-to-day lives, there's the witness part of us watching the outward piece of us interact with the world and kind of just, witnessing basically.
Yeah.
When you're in that state, do you know what I'm talking about? Like how you have like the silent witness who just kind of is always aware of what your external personality is doing. When you're in that state, does that like kind of collapse where like, were you watching yourself, or was the witness and the self where you just kind of collapsed into one?
You don't have like an out of body experience, or at least I didn't. So it's not like you see yourself third person objectively. Like you feel very much like suddenly you just have realizations, right? Like everything.
Like you just are the experience. You're no longer a man having an experience. You are the experience. That's what it sounds like to me. Like
Well, this was a bit different because I didn't have ego dissolution. Like I was in my body.
Oh, okay.
So it was like everything just became clear, and then I started behaving weird, and then everybody was like, "Yeah, we knew this was all going to happen." We Rack has this term galactivate, where like you just suddenly get turned on to the. It's like you suddenly have a mini leap in evolution, and your consciousness instantly shifts up 3 stages. It's like the battery just charges 3 more bars, right? So it's like he went 3 bars up, and then he's finally realizing who he is. And one of the main things I kept saying is, I remember, because again, the phylogenetic memory.
Yeah.
So
Was
I
it
remember.
like a transformation then, Niles, like an inner transformation that you could actually really experience while you were in a heightened state of consciousness? Like living the transformation, not just imagining it, but actually witnessing it, being it.
Yes. And it's kind of like there's an element to LSD. I took LSD once, and there was a synchronicity with this in LSD where I took LSD at night, and then I took it. LSD is a much longer experience, and it's very physically difficult on you. But LSD is a very like turning the circuit board of reality over and just seeing what's on the back of the circuit board. And when I was waking up in the morning to talk about these vanilla skies, it's like there was this beautiful sunrise sky that was very textured and beautiful. Again, reference the poster. But then what LSD does is it like shows. I think LSD takes away something that you usually have, a filter that you usually see through your normal reality. So again, my most profound experiences have been these open eye experiences where you see reality differently. And so LSD just turns off that little thing that shows you that makes you think reality is the way that you see it, and you see reality much more analytically. And so it's like reality is much more vibratory, so everything's vibrating, so the trees are shimmering and moving and vibrating. And as I'm waking up in the morning, the skies are shimmering and smiling and moving, and the ground is all kind of shimmering and smiling, and it's all like moving around a little bit. You see reality, but again, it's like a abstractionist watercolor painting of reality. So that was the visual realization, like to answer your question, Elf, where you just kind of feel like you're seeing things more the real. It's like you have new lenses on. It's like suddenly you've always seen reality without glasses, and then the toad has just given you perfect vision suddenly, right? Which is realizing who you are, more what you are, and more what reality is, which is not at all what we've been told, right? So this is the medicine. It's not like, oh, I feel better, I don't have a headache anymore. It's like, holy shit, I've suddenly been sucked out of my matrix pod and I see something. But the thing that's so profound about the experience is the synchronistic element for me, is that everything leading up to that moment, I suddenly it was like I traversed through all the back steps, and suddenly I realized that all those back steps are there for a reason. Yeah. So like we talk about in our material, there are no coincidences, right? So like everything in your life is leading you to something for a reason. And when you smoke the toad, you will be at a place at a time where it's very intentional that you were there at that time. and something will happen that will blow your mind more than you can even imagine.
Yeah.
So
you've had like quite a bit of, time that has passed, since that happened. What would you say, how would you say you've incorporated that? Like, how has it shifted you up and expanded your day-to-day experience?
Yeah, that's a great question, because the integration is such a profound part of it. Well, I feel like for me, and not to just make this an ego blurb about me, even though it's like I can only talk about my direct experience, because again, the experience is different for everybody. Everybody has
Right.
slightly different experiences, right? We had somebody on the trip with us who's had probably a very kind of rough background, and his experience was very purgative and almost looked very like exorcist where the
Yeah,
toad
yeah.
was just going in and defragging him physically, and he was basically, stuff was coming out every orifice practically.
Yeah.
And so
Rather unpleasant.
rather unpleasant. So it's not, you don't mess around with it, right? So you do it. And so it brings out not only what's in you, and it's like a mirror of your attainment level. So you gals would all do amazingly well with it, because you all, big hugs to all of you. You all have such amazingly high attainment level because of your knowledge of like esoteric and inner development work, that if you did this, it's like a mirror for your attainment level. So you would get so much more out of it than if you didn't have any development or any knowledge of the things that you've studied or researched, or why you are interested in the things that all of you are interested in.
Right.
To even further answer that question, it's basically like yes, you have that kind of like, everything is made even more clear to you. So moving on, now strap in, folks, strap in, anybody that's listening, because this is where, put on your seatbelt, because this is where the conversation gets really weird.
Right.
So the smoking toads and dancing around in ancient Vedic mudra dances isn't weird enough. I started this conversation by saying that our mutual friend gave me a insight as to the spatial model of reality. And so this is where we'll lose people, because this issue, as Elf and I have talked about, it can be very divisive and very polarizing.
Yeah, bring it on, Niles.
Bring it on. Okay. So let's just kind of start talking about this next thing. Let's be objective about it and just say that, sure, we'll consider it. And, regardless of what people's thoughts are about it, let's just try and put on our I don't want to just say put on our tinfoil hats, but just say that let's keep an open mind. This is
your experience, so just tell it like it is. Tell it how you experienced it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And a lot of what I'm going to start talking about is a thing that is very divisive and, again, polarizing. And a lot of the proponents talking about it say that it's something that instantly just marginalizes you. And how dare you even begin to bring up this element of this conversation? But again, through my own direct experience, one of the main thoughts that I got is feeling like I was in a very domed space, right? So, this is something that as I start talking about, it instantly it could be labeled to me as being crazy. But if a freaking Sonoran desert toad that we nicknamed Lazarus told me this information, maybe it's valid.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, come on.
You ask about the reintegration of it. A lot of it has been me kind of trying to. A lot of what I feel like I've been doing in life is that I've been developing projects that are my own personal inner development projects, and they're my own projects that I'm realizing are not there to do the projects, to further answer your question, Amanda, I'm not there to do these projects. These projects are there to grow me. I'm using I'm using the work for the growth, right? So we all have our outlets. Like, Elf has writing, and like Kyrie says he has his music. And so you use the art for the growth. So this experience sure as shit told me that these projects exist for me to have these experiences, for me to grow, and that I'm not even there to do the projects. It's not about the work. It's about the growth that you get out of the projects.
Yeah.
Here we go. Strap in. So I felt like I was on a very flat, infinite plane, right? Like I didn't feel like I was on a sphere. I didn't feel like I was on Earth that was a circle. I felt like it was a very infinite, like never-ending flat plane. And there's some proponents now that have been starting a lot of talk online now that's mainly stemmed out of one person that, raised this material about the world being flat, right? Mm-hmm. There's the new proponent specifically. There's one person specifically that's talked about this who's very eloquent and very far from perfect, that has brought up this material again, which hadn't been talked about in 100 years, about the shape of the planet. And basically, the proponents of it are talking about how, when you look more into this material about the flat Earth movement, is that there's a lot of it's very hard, the more that you look into it, to not think that there's something in it, because there is a lot of interesting information in it. So people, when somebody says, oh, the world could be flat, you're so instantly marginalized and dismissed and signed off as crazy. But if you keep an open mind with it, and the more you look into it, the more there are some things in it that seem very amazing. And one thing that I know, Elf, that you might want to mention to this is that it's very difficult to describe curvature when you really look into some of the details.
Right.
So if I'm suddenly being told by a toad that I'm on an infinite flat plane with a dome above me that's melting into watercolor, that's insane, right? That's like beyond ludicrously like crazy. So it's like, we've all seen globes in classrooms all through when we were growing up. And, if that has any remote amount of truth, then there's a huge amount of things that we think we need to rethink, and that things that are telling us things are not accurate. So it's very kind of crazy to even mention that. So I'm gonna talk about this a little bit, assuming that this could even, keeping an open mind, assuming, just giving this the benefit of the doubt, thinking that this could even be a possibility.
Yeah.
Basically, there's a poet who is also a mystic named William Blake that had a chapter in one of his poems that described the flat earth as becoming a sphere. And basically, our mutual friend had been told by some other people that he studied with in his esoteric development that said that to question the spatial model of reality, and he didn't know what that meant. So he's kind of on the front where maybe, I'll give some of this material a little bit of a benefit of the doubt, because that would parallel with not only a lot of my beliefs about who human beings are and what we are and where we're going, but also the spatial model. This spatial model would kind of support the profound power and amazingness of human beings, because if we're in a heliocentric universe, human beings where we're on spheres that rotate around the sun, in an infinite or material space of reality, then human beings are much less important than if we're on a geocentric flat place where, we are literally essentially gods, right? Like, we are profoundly more important than we think. So that's kind of the argument for, if somebody is talking a lot about the profound amazingness and importance of human beings and how mentally we have so much power to create our realities around us, then that spatial model kind of does support that. So that's what interests me about it, is just that alignment. So there's a sync about this with our mutual friend confiding in me that this is, something that he was once told, that just kind of has allowed him to keep an open ear to this material, is basically the way to summarize it. Now, there are basically a lot of ancient civilizations in the past have talked about, there's ancient cosmology in terms of the structure in the heavens according to the ancients. And so the argument from basically like somebody like Carl Sagan or Richard Dawkins is that if you're putting people onto some sort of flat plane with a dome above it, and that the universe is geocentric, then you're reducing the size of the universe, right? You're reducing it into something that's very small when the universe is so vast. But if you think about it from a spiritual perspective, in terms of multidimensionality, which is what a shaman is doing, a shaman is leading you up and down a ladder of dimensions. The argument is that the mindset reduces the universe, but that is if you don't recognize any sort of spiritual element to things, right? If you're just purely looking at it from a materialist standpoint. So you must have a spiritualized mind to even begin to accept that this could be the spatial model of reality. And I suspect that if this ends up being even remotely the case, then this is a reason why you would want to prevent this spatial model from being realized, is because then people start realizing the spiritual nature of reality and the power that is developed within that internal development.
Right.
So in Kabbalah, in the Kabbalistic system, we have Malkuth, which is the base level of Kabbalah, and then that goes all the way up to the firmament. So terra firma being this 3D material reality, if a spatial model of that is a just flat infinite plane. And again, I didn't get a feeling like that we're in some sort of dome space that then stops and then everything else out there is just a drop off. I got a feeling that it just is an infinite plane, which is hard for people to wrap their minds around in terms of material reality. So I got a feeling like we're on an infinite plane, and that there might even be more land out there, but we're kept in this dome space for our own growth as we're in this maze, to kind of realize that we need to learn and grow, and that maybe later on the dome will evaporate or grow or move away or dissolve or something like that, so that then we can have access to more land and more resources that are available once we stop trashing our planet, our fragile little ecosystem.
So how about the dome is really not a solid object, but an electrical field that is pliable and meshes with how consciousness changes and expands.
Yes.
It's solid and hard for people who, kind of, maybe see it as a Truman Show. I don't think it's that at all. I think that the nature of the dome is it's electrical in nature, and that it has a pliable component to it that is very, very deeply meshed with consciousness.
Yes, exactly. Right. And that's the thing, is that you have to look at the ancient religious text from a third eye perspective. You have to look at the spatial model from a spiritual perspective, because there's ancient systems like the Vishnu or the Brahma, talked about things in terms of what's called Brahmandala. And in Brahmandala, there was this infinite flat plane where we are in a spherical world, but in terms of the actual, we're not on a circle, we're on the inner, like the inner egg yolk of a sphere, right? So, and then Mount Meru is at the magnetic north, the center of the North Pole, because of argument of the flat Earth model is that there is if you look at the UN map, which is of course another synchronicity, because Octavio has a UN, he's auspiced by UNESCO, so he has a UN map on his car. And the proponents of the flat Earth model argue that the UN flag is a map of the flat Earth, where the North Pole is at the center of the flat Earth, and then the actual perimeter of the flat Earth is Antarctica, which is all a perimeter around us. Mm-hmm. So Mount Meru, the ancient cultures talked about this, right? They talked about Mount Meru being at magnetic north, and that there's this thing called the Yggdrasil, which is that Yggdrasil, I'm sorry.
Yeah. The Norse
thank you.
Tree.
The Norse tree.
I just read that.
Yes, the Yggdrasil. So this has been talked about for go as far back as you want, and ancient cultures were talking about these things in terms of the spatial model. So the Yggdrasil, which is the tree that is on the cover of Manly P. Hall's Secret Teachings of All Ages, for example. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then that Yggdrasil tree is at the center of the actual flat plane. And then the Ouroboros, which is the snake that it's its tail, is essentially represented as, if you look at some of the flat Earth material, some of the flat Earth maps, you sometimes may see the Ouroboros represented as that perimeter of Antarctica. And that Ouroboros, like the figure 8 that I got with the symmetry, is a representation of infinity, right? So then all of a sudden, here I am thinking that there's endless land out there, when I see the Ouroboros as a representation of the edge of the perimeter of the flat Earth. So again, it's difficult for somebody that thinks purely materially to represent like, oh, how can we have infinite land out there? Mm-hmm. But in some of these ancient cosmologies, if we are at the egg yolk of a sphere-shaped reality, then in a multidimensional model, there are much more vast cosmoses out there. Because what I've seen in some of my other entheogenic experiences is that I do feel a very starry space, cosmos, infinite multiverse activation in another dimensional space. So one of the most profound thoughts I got from my experience is that in material reality, this is a very small material reality, like Carl Sagan or Richard Dawkins would argue, is you are reducing this reality, but that's just one element of multi-dimensions, right? In another dimensional space, we do have the cosmos, and that we project from our subjective point down here, to use kind of like a virtual reality metaphor, right, that if we're like the center of this virtual reality space and we project, the actual cosmos out there, what we're really doing is we're representing what we really see in other dimensional spaces when we dream, right? So we can travel to the cosmos, but we can't do it in a physical ship, right? We can do it spiritually.
Yeah.
So you're not traveling to other star systems. You're not traveling to Mars or other planets in ships, but you're traveling there spiritually. So to go back to the Kabbalistic tree of life, like Malkuth is this material plane, and then other layers of the Kabbalah are these other corollaries of the planets which correlate to our chakras, our 7 chakras in our body. So again, this is as above, so below stuff, right?
Right.
Yeah, and in the Rosicrucian cosmoconception, there's this quote that I pulled that says, In a manner similar to that which is the world of life, spirit correlates us to the other planets in our own solar system. Does not the world divine, the spirit, correlate us to the other solar systems? We may regard the solar system as separate sponges swimming in a world of divine spirit, and this it will be apparent that in order to travel from one solar system to another, it would be necessary to be able to function consciously in the highest vehicle of man, the divine spirit. So you can travel to other planets and other places, just not in your physical body.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, one of the ways that I feel like it's helpful, especially like you had said, we'll just go ahead and give us the benefit of the doubt that this is a theory that we could even just talk freely about. And I think one of the key things for me is just giving yourself permission to look at it, calmly and without any mental rigidity. Because if you, like, for example, one of the ways that I think of it, it seems almost disappointing, like you were kind of alluding to, well, wait, you're diminishing the reality if you're saying the universe isn't this or that. It's actually not. At first glance, it feels like you're diminishing reality in that way. But then when you add into it, exactly like what Rack was telling you about your experience with the toad, he was just saying, yeah, it was a galactivation. That's, you were doing something, you were tapping into something that was already there, something that you already embodied. It was just giving you a little window into something, because like removing some of the veils that are normally there as we walk around. So yes, for the average person that is only engaged in their day-to-day stuff, they don't even have any idea of their own potential. It seems like it would be limiting, but really what it is getting you, if you can just get over that, you can be a little bit mentally flexible and say, well, okay, so what if it's an infinite plane, you were originally thinking it was an infinite universe that physically you could go to.
Yeah.
So now you're just, it's a subtle tweak, actually. It's just a small, subtle tweak to say, no, it's an infinite plane. And then, but still all of that amazing, capacity to explore universes and galaxies and all that kind of stuff would be coming just at a different experience. A different experiential level. That's
more spiritual level. And that's the thing,
Yeah.
is you have to have the spiritual development like we all talk about so much to even begin to, it's like this could be part of our evolutionary process, right? As human beings, as nodes on the network switch on, they start questioning things and they start realizing that more reality is spiritual, which if there is a power pyramid that holds the strings, you could see why the shadowy controllers of a power pyramid would want to trick people into thinking that what is really more spiritual is really more physical. So if let's say we're in 3D reality, if you're in 4D reality, and 4D reality is you traveling through the cosmos in an infinite space like you'd see in Star Trek, then they'd want to trick you into thinking that 4D space is really the 3D space, that it's all physical, that there is no spiritual.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
Totally.
Well, it's even like what we're doing right now. We are limited to this particular format of communication, right, between the four of us, because we're not totally up online yet with our telepathic communication.
Yeah.
So we put it into a material form for now.
Exactly. Such a perfect metaphor.
Well, you know what the interesting thing for me is about this is this is a fascinating discussion, and I'm pretty sure that when the public listens to this, you'll have some people go, what are those for smoking? Can we have some of them too?
Toad medicine.
It's pretty.
yeah, but the key thing for me is that to me it always comes back to integration. And integration then leads to attainment. And getting back to what you said earlier on, Niles, that we are here to accomplish something. There's a lot of New Age people who talk about mastery, and most of them have it completely backwards. But mastery means that we have to learn to master ourselves on this planet here, and so equally to how you attain mastery over your own life, things begin to unfold and you gain insight into deeper matter. So the stuff that we're talking about here, it doesn't mean that we should all wear a white robe and, go sit on a cloud someplace. It doesn't mean that at all, but it just means that we have an insight into things that we may not really be able to realize yet. But that's the point. The point is that we're moving towards that.
Right, exactly. And even if this is all hogwash and this doesn't turns out to be accurate, it's just interesting to explore it because I do find that there's parallels in it with other material that I've looked at. And a lot of like ancient culture material or anything that is interested in areas that we are in terms of like Hermeticism or more esoteric practices, a lot of these things do correlate with this material. So it's like all of these things are
Yeah.
funneling in to
Yeah.
all support the nature that we're all very much more powerful than we think. And then if we're in a geocentric flat dome and that there's absolutely, let's say there's absolutely nothing off planet and we're literally in our own Truman shows, and I'm feeling like reality is all a setup. If we're each in our own Truman shows and it's all a setup for each of us, it makes sense that this is all a training ground that our souls transit into. That's a very intelligently designed, not from kind of like just a purely like religious text standpoint, but from kind of a third eye philosophical standpoint. It's a intentional training ground that we transit to learn and grow. And then we assume that these ancient cultures and civilizations would say these things about the spatial model, like would talk about the world being flat in Brahmandala because of a lack of scientific knowledge, because they just didn't know any better. That's maybe perhaps not at all true. And so our mutual friend, was saying that what if no matter how far you dug in the ground, you would never reach the bottom? And no matter how high of a physical craft you flew, you would never reach the top, like a dome or barrier. Because as long as you are in this dimension, there are no physical boundaries you can cross physically. What if all that we see with our eyes and measure of our instruments only exist when we are observing it, and that as long as we are observing it, it goes on, down and down and down, and up and up and up? Then what would
Yeah.
that mean if the stars are indeed different dimensions and we could never go there physically? So we have to go there spiritually,
Yeah.
right? A lot of these things correlate too with what's called syncretism. And analema of the sun, which is, masculine, and the moon being feminine. There's talk of analema, which are the sun and the moon circling above the flat earth in this yin-yang formation. And this is where the metaphor of the tortoise and the hare come, is that the argument from the proponents of the flat earth model is that the sun and the moon are not very far away. They're very close. And if you look at the rays of the sun on any day where you can see the rays, they look pretty close because they're all splitting out from a position. They're not all parallel, which would be a characteristic that would happen if a sun is 93 million miles away. They split from a very distinct triangular shape, which shows that the sun could be very close, which kind of supports this flat earth model. And then the argument also is that they're the same size in perfect equanimity, right? So why do we have one thing that's the masculine bright thing and one that's the feminine dark thing that just happen to be above us? And of course, science says that on other planets there are other moons. But if there's nothing off planet and the only other things that, planets are is a spiritual sense, like our chakras, then the sun and the moon, isn't it a funny coincidence that on this material realm we have these two things, one dark and one light, floating above us? And if the souls transit here through the sun, it's like that's an interesting element to that spatial model that I think about a lot. There's talk about this in terms of a Kundalini spiral, where basically like souls transit in and then they filter down through the Milky Way, through the Kabbalistic systems, down the 7 chakras, into the 7 layers of vibration of the diatonic octaves, down into the material plane, which is the heart, because heart is an anagram for earth.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. There's a toroidal plane that emanates from Mount Muru, which I guess, Gurdjieff, George Ivanovich Gurdjieff talked about how the thoughts of men are food for the moon.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. And how that basically Octavio has you stand up when you smoke the toad like a warrior and look at the sun, because that is kind of more, if those are balanced in perfect equanimity, it's like basically what you're doing when you're smoking the toad is you're exiting through the sun to go into the astral, to have an experience, to expand your consciousness, to come back in through down into terra firma, back down through that spiral, back down to 3D material reality. And when I talked about this with our mutual friend, Steiner, talked about this a lot in terms of the conception of the universe, where he talks about how so much of space and cosmos is a spiritual thing and not a physical thing. And I think we may be tricked into thinking more about how the cosmos is a physical thing than we think. So like that quote that I read where it's like, you can see these stars physically, but you could never go there. There's very easy ways to go there spiritually, more so than you think. And one of the things that I should say is that during the experience, I didn't feel like we were on this kind of prison planet, but I did feel like we were in this kind of construct physically in terms of this like maze that we all have to navigate. And, to go back to Truman's Show and Groundhog Day, I mean, the Groundhog Day component is obviously a repeating of your experience from life to life to life until you figure this out. And, synchronicities do support this, the mindset that we all have synchronicities in our life that help us navigate this maze and live this life to figure out these things. And so one thing that our mutual friend did say is that the Hermeticists were kind of onto this, right? Like many thousands of years ago, is that they were realizing that there's something going on with the reality that we've been proposed to versus what the real reality is. And maybe what we've talked about hasn't hit it. Maybe it's off the mark, but maybe not, So the firmament that you're on, and if the dome is above you, if that becomes illuminated, which can't happen materially, it can only happen spiritually, then it makes sense to me that like on just this physical dimension, that is a pretty small space compared to what we really think. So, I'll use a virtual reality metaphor, which I often do too, is that in virtual reality, you put on this headset where you're essentially the center point of this dome reality. And like I've talked about, when in computer graphics, when you create a scene or light a scene, you do it just like how this is. You basically create a flat plane, and then you create a dome above the scene, and then you light the scene in, computer graphics just like that. So it's like, that's how you do it in computer graphics. And when you're in virtual reality spaces, it's very similar, right? Where you're not on a sphere, you're on a flat plane and you have a dome above you. So a lot of these technologies, like Amanda mentioned, where we end up repeating with our hardware technologies what our real vegetable technologies can do. Maybe we do that with our reality as well.
Yeah.
And that's what I can't help think about sometimes. It's like you're on a stage and your body is center stage, right? So super bonkers, but an interesting realization. And this is the type of hermetic philosophy that is supported from freaking smoking a toad.
Well, interesting thing is that I think that, as there are clearly other dimensions, for the sake of the discussion, above us, still enclosed, I think, within this, for want of a better term, dome reality or the firmament, they are equal levels then below us too, where other worlds exist. And, you and I talked about it the other day. We talked about Bonacci's work, and, that he actually is, he's quite a divider of people. He's very, very outspoken. It's white or black, there's no in between. But the model represented in that particular discussion that we had, kind of rings true for me, because I look at that and I say to myself, wow, how's that not logical?
Yeah, and I think we can look into these things and not be polarized in them, and also not say like, oh, I'm sure it's one way or I'm sure it's another way. But it's something that we can say like, oh, maybe there's a possibility, and it's not to just kind of like put chlorine in the water and make everybody not sure. But I think it's good to consider, it's good to kind of look into things and think about, hey, maybe it's possible.
Yeah, I was going to say, it seems to me that regardless of what we're discussing, whether it's flat earth or some other thing that's not socially acceptable and divisive, is that itself is an act of liberation, because you are allowing yourself to go into a place of intelligent discussion and sharing without the shame and judgment that society has kind of given us from a very young age. Where I know Amanda and I have had this talk where our kids aren't in school, and they're I've noticed they're a lot more open to just things that go through their head, and we're as adults relearning how to just be open with thoughts that go through our head, with sharing them, and that vulnerability and that space of being able to have an intelligent discussion. And it doesn't need to fit into this matrix reality where this is completely, labeled immediately one way or the other.
Yeah.
It's just, we are now liberating ourselves just by allowing ourselves to have this discussion openly, and just a free flow of ideas back and forth.
Yeah,
So
well, that's exactly what I was meaning by like just giving yourself permission to have just a very flexible mental capacity.
Yes.
You don't have to, because usually when you get into being really dogmatic or polarized about something, it's because you're defending a position. There's a defense in there of something that makes you nervous. And, it could go to it could be all kinds of things, but you're defending for some reason. And that is really interesting to me if you're feeling that resistance to my best tool for neutralizing resistance is curiosity.
Very well said. That's so well said, because that's the people's towers that they build up, isn't it? Like where you're, if what we've just talked about is even remotely true, it means you have to rethink so many things at a foundation level that people are so fear-based and even thinking that they could have been tricked or, misguided or like thinking that if any of those things are real, then they have to put up their giant Captain America shield and be like, no, block that.
Exactly. Yeah. And so if you can just relax that a little bit and give yourself permission to just be curious.
Yes.
You can discover all kinds of things.
And the process is just as powerful as the knowledge. The process of finding the knowledge is as powerful as, true, is more powerful. So, and another interesting little side note that I just kind of popped through my head, and I think I've discussed this with you before, is just watching I have a teenage daughter, and watching the books that are now coming online, the action-packed, really incredible books. Hunger Games is one of the top ones I can think of, but there's a huge emphasis on arenas and domes and the activities happening within that arena and that dome affecting the land outside of it. So whether it be Divergence or Maze Runner or Hunger Games or some that pop in, everything happens in this consolidated space. So I feel like it's running at a very high level in the subconscious, and those creative authors who are able to tap into kind of like a Tolkien style or J.K. Rowling, where they just kind of tap into that magic and pull it down and put it into words. It's definitely out there and circulating in the subconscious field right now. I definitely see that.
And look at Renaissance architecture as well, right? Like look at the Pantheon, and it's like all these, any of these, the Florence Cathedral, like we have some of the highest antiquity, amazing art and architecture has been domed structures. And we certainly have a propensity for creating beautifully domed structures, even like the Capitol building in DC. It's like we look up at these domes, and there's like paintings on the domes, and it's like that maybe that is a metaphor, maybe that is a subconscious metaphor for looking up at a dome and getting data from somewhere else, And I think about how Elf just mentioned, maybe there's dimensional layers above us and dimensional layers below us. And is that what maybe theology has turned into heaven and hell? Maybe that is the real esoteric meaning of what heaven and hell really are.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, but then to take away from it, one thing I just should add is that one of the things that I did feel through the whole guiding light of the whole experience is just a very love-based experience. So everything I spent the last hour talking about happened in 7 minutes, and I just felt very love-based, And so by the end of it, you're basically crying these tears of love, just feeling unbelievable warmth and love from those around you because you've done it in such beautiful setting, and knowing that the people in your life are very important people that you all know. I think, all of us probably met each other for a reason, to share these stories and to all level each other up. So the Toad does such an amazing, beautiful job of cutting through your negative shit. So if you have any if you have any depression or things that you're bummed out about or things that you're stuck in, I think this medicine does a huge job of not only giving you like a Photoshop program splitting of 1,000 layers of reality in 5 minutes, but it also gives you these realizations of like, continue doing this, you're on the right path. Yeah. And Octavio says, Octavio said something beautiful, which is that he says it doesn't give you what you want, it gives you what you need.
Yeah. So true, because you see, I fundamentally believe that reality unfolds and the universe gives up its secrets to us in direct correlation to how we expand our consciousness. And you cannot expand your consciousness if you do not continuously ask questions. You don't continuously investigate. And I think that's probably one of the biggest sins, if you like, if there is something like sin, is complacency, where people just, fall into a rut and they keep doing the same things over and over and life doesn't change. There's no excitement. Whereas what we're doing is that we're investigating the nature of reality. And I think that there is so much more to discover and to know about where we are and why we are here and how we came here. and our true relation to this to this universe and what lies beyond it. But that doesn't come to you if you don't investigate, if you don't ask questions, if you're not curious, if you don't, that curiosity is minus the judgment, without wanting to say this is right or this is wrong. And the four of us, all four, know that this particular topic is such a hot topic. It's so divisive. You can actually split families right down the middle.
Mm-hmm.
Because, when you say something like that, the first, especially if you're talking to people who don't actually question anything ever, is, well, why you're going back to the dark ages? Have you lost your mind? How can you even go there? And,
Yeah. And you did something
very divisive.
It's very divisive, and you mentioned somebody specifically on this call, Elfrida, whose name is Santos Bonacci, who I really like Santos's material, and I have a lot of respect for Santos and love to Santos. But one of the things that he is doing now is that, I don't want to say a failure of his, but something that he could work on, is that he's very polarizing. He's one of the flat Earth proponents right now, and he's become very polarizing about it, where he claims dogmatically that if you're not believing this, then you're on the side of, he even uses things that sound like kind of biblical references. He's like, if you don't believe the world is a flat, you're the devil, or you're from Satan, which is not good. And so somebody that has beautiful material, that's something that I hope that he works on and realizes. Okay.
Didn't you have another experience with a toad?
That's where we're going, baby.
Oh, let's go.
Okay, so on the last day of the show, the ceremony was the second to the last day. The next morning, this was kind of wild, but we shot some more footage in this little cave in the area of outside the Surrey community. And basically, like we were talking about, where Octavio suspects that the toads were originally first discovered because people would throw them on the fire to eat them, and would realize there was this, finally figured out that it was the glands, the chemical in their glands that were being cooked. He took some of the medicine, and we went in this little cave, and he started pouring it on the fire. And this is what smoke, Native American smoke rooms are, and smokeouts, is that they're actually smoking a sacrament, and then they're all together as one, breathing in the smoke and having an experience together. So he starts pouring the toad flakes, because when they're dried, they end up looking like fish flakes. After they're popped and put on the glass and then dried off, they look very much like fish, what you feed fish, like they look like fish food. Okay. So he's pouring these fish flakes from this little capsule onto the fire, and you start smelling this very distinct DMT burning smell, which is a smell that you never forget once you smell it. It has this weird mothball-y plastic smell to it. It's very odd, its smell. And so we all essentially start breathing in the toad medicine again in this cave, and we all start kind of getting these little feelings of activation again. So, and if you take a very light amount of this medicine, you'll kind of have very subtle activation of it. So I started getting little light activations in my fingertips, but then sure enough, I started getting those xenolinguistics back again, this language, right? And so this time I got an audio recording of it. So there is audio of it. So I can send that to you, lovely ladies, if you'd like to hear it.
I would certainly love to hear that.
Yeah.
Did this one take place after the first one you described?
Yeah, so this was just the next day. And so I what I'd like to do is, if somebody listens to this and is a linguist, I'd love to send this to a linguist and actually see if there's any real structure in this language, because I don't have control of it. It's just kind of happens, it just kind of, I just start doing it, and I just instinctually feel like I should start talking it, and it just happens. But it sounds very ancient and alien, which is the odd element to it. That's the very last day. So we go back, amazing, life-changing experience shooting the first episode of this show, suffice it to say. Yeah. That's a simple, put a period on that. The thing about the medicine is that in terms of an entheogen, when you smoke it once, it's like you're kind of upgraded. So it has permanent, long-lasting beneficial effects. And one of the things that's so crazy about it is that when you've had one exposure to it, when you take other sacraments down the line, months later, years later, you will exhibit some of the characteristics that you exhibited when you did the toad medicine. So about 2 months after the show happened, I was back home, and my father, he's totally retired and he loves his cannabis, just enjoying his cannabis in his retired years. I had an edible that I don't think that my father had tried or something, and I had an edible too that I had given to him, and I didn't realize for some reason that this thing had as much cannabis in it as I thought. I thought it was there's certain edibles that aren't don't have the actual psychoactive component in it, and so I ate a little bit of this edible while I was writing one day in my office. And I'm sitting out. The office has this beautiful deck outside, and about half an hour after I ate this thing, I'm like, "Oh my God, something's happening." I'm like getting totally high off this thing. I ate about half of it. I ate probably more than I should have.
Yeah.
So I'm like, "Oh my God, I'm high. I'm high as fuck." So I went outside and I sat on the deck, and I sure as shit had the symmetry stuff come back again. So my body, and I had a different characteristic of it, where my hands started moving in figure eights. My arms started moving in these like fluctuated, almost like yogic poses of these figure eights. And then my neck, I started moving my neck in these figure eight poses. And then I suddenly realized that this was not something I was controlling. My body just started going into these symmetry, this kind of back to the tryptamine symmetry figure eight things. And it was almost like I was doing some sort of ancient yogic practice or something with these figure eights. So I look at the like infinity symbol of an 8, and this has a new deep meaning to me because I think there's another layer to the infinity symbol, not only representing infinity, but being something that our bodies naturally can do. That's some sort of like, physical healing practice.
Right.
So that's an element of the medicine applying to another medicine where you exhibit similar characteristics to it, that it was just something that maybe was another synchronicity where I hadn't planned that at all.
Mm-hmm.
So the second time, I've had 2 exposures with 5-MeO-DMT. So the second time came about maybe 6 months later around one of the other projects. So again, talk about these projects all aligning with things. At the time we're recording this, I have 3 kind of life projects going right now. One is, our documentary Transmutation. The other is this Shamans of the Global Village. And the third project is this thing called Terra Incognita, which is very wild. But through Terra Incognita, half of it is a science-based project, and the other half of it is a actual film-based project around neuroscans, EEGs being the EEGs, head caps that you wear to scan the brain of people under various states of consciousness. And so through Terra Incognita, we did a ceremony with something called the Temple of Awakening Divinity. And so what is the Temple of Awakening Divinity an acronym for? But TOAD, TOAD. So,
oh my goodness. Oh my goodness.
So the Temple of Awakening Divinity is an entheogenic, syncretic, not a church, but basically a temple. And so what it really is it's a gentleman named Hal. Hal is not his real name, who is a member of the Order Templar Orientis, which is a magical order that does a lot of its practices based off the Book of the Law, which is a book written by Aleister Crowley. And so it's not so much shamanic, but more magical, like magical esoteric. So they do this practice where it's essentially Hal who drives up and down the west coast of the United States with the toad medicine, and he does these magical ceremonies. And the toad medicine is the center sacrament of the ceremonies. It's funny because this is more what human beings are designed to be doing on their Friday nights, right? They're not designed to be going out to dinner, but they're designed to be in magical and shamanic ceremony. And I know that sounds pretty far out there, but these things are so profound. I'm starting to realize that this is some of the inner deal stuff. But he basically goes around and has these ceremonies where people get together and have the toad medicine in a magical practice, not so much a shamanic practice. And so the Book of the Law has certain material in it that is very influenced by what Hal's work does. And so let me read you a little something that Hal wrote just to show you the content of Hal's character. So this will give you a real insight into Hal. Once more we spiral inward towards the depths of darkness as the radiant sun reaches the nadir of the winter solstice on its annual journey in this never-ending cycle of the great mystery. Similarly, we, as well, are called to this time of year to turn inward towards the center source of our being, drawing in our own energy and focus of attention to reflect upon this inner light shining within the darkness of our own consciousness. It is in this inner spark or central sun at its core of our existence that illuminates our being, guiding us ever onward, even as we are challenged to navigate through these dark and colder times which we are often faced within our lives. Just as our own world around us often seems fulfilled with the shadows of obscurity and delusion that tempt us with their thunderous din of distraction to turn away from that central light of source, leading us down potential false paths, maze-like labyrinths, passageways, and dead ends that seem to lead nowhere, causing us to doubt the path we find ourselves on and leaving us bewildered and confused. Yet it is the light of Source itself, realized like a radiant supernova within our consciousness, that shatters any and all false, illusory concepts of self, dissolving away the walls of this maze we have self-created that limits or traps us in ways of being that ultimately do not serve us. It is in this shattered brilliance that we are allowed to remember who and what we really are, the unitive light of Source itself. And yet, as we integrate this light back into our awakening human consciousness, it becomes our task to repattern and reshape ourselves in congruency and alignment with that eternal light. It is indeed our great work to be willing and open ourselves continually in order to refashion ourselves and forge these new pathways, making the necessary adjustments moment to moment to our ways of being, keeping ourselves on track and bringing that inner light into the world around us, like a brilliant pole star shining in the heavens within, for it is that radiant guiding star that will forever forge to serve it to lead us to the luminous light of perfect love and perfect trust in finding our way home. Yeah, so that's the type of thing that Hal writes. That's from his newsletter. So he's quite a remarkable dude. Basically, we have a ceremony with the Temple of Awakening Divinity around this project. And again, it's a very esoteric ceremony. You guys would love it. You would absolutely love it. And so they have a newsletter and people sign up for it. And, you know, it's an invite-only temple. So, of course, if you've known somebody that's experienced the temple, you can be invited into it. And it's kind of like, that's kind of their initiation for it. And so we're doing this ceremony at this place. And this woman shows up basically a few hours before we do the ceremony. And I'm filming material for the ceremony for this other project. And one of the things that Terra Incognita is trying to study is what's called the group gestalt. So when you do these tryptamines, you can go in, if you take them in smaller doses, you wouldn't want to do this with a full large dose like we did for the actual Shamans episode. But if you do them in smaller doses, you can go into these spaces together. Basically, like the three of you can all take a light amount of toad medicine and go into the astral space as one vehicle together. And so again, I reference this as like, this is what human beings are designed to do, man. Like on Friday nights, like we're designed to be in ceremonies doing these things together. This is the global shamanic culture that we once were and that we will return to. And so we're not designed to go out to frickin' like the Cheesecake Factory for dinner.
That's very disappointing for me to hear that.
You know, we're designed to go, you know, like powerful women, you know, shamanic women would get together and do these shamanic practices and all upload together to have these amazing consciousness expanding experiences together.
Well, how do we make that happen?
Yeah. I was filming this stuff and it was kind of an afterthought that this would be even something that I would partake in that night. We filmed a group gestalt experience. I filmed, again, never before seen material of people, you know, half a dozen people going into these medicine spaces together and what that actually physically looks like in the room. And so both of these projects kind of correlate with me filming this, you know, shamanic, you know, esoteric material. And again, you can never do the internal experience. You can never really do that justice. You can kind of only show what happens on the outside. So like if somebody was to see the footage of my experience, it would just kind of look like, oh, there's Niles like dancing around and, you know, blah, blah, blah. But it's like compared to what you internally feel, which is so beautiful, it's like video cannot capture that. Yeah. So anyway, that being said, I am capturing stunning video that's never been captured before. So basically at the very end, there was a little bit more time. Basically, it was offered up that we could do one more practice. So 4 of us, I stopped filming, and 4 of us sat down together. It was me, and then these 2 other gentlemen that were kind of just there for, I think, a little bit. They weren't even sure if they were going to partake. We all know each other, right? Everybody knows each other. But this gal had shown up who I'd never met before, and I'd never known. And she's sitting across from me in this circle of 4 people that are getting ready to have the shared experience together in Gestalt. We smoke the material together. We smoke the substance in small doses. Like one person just takes a little puff and another person takes a little puff from what Hal calls the lamp, which is how he administers the medicine. He has this thing called the lamp. Basically, suddenly the energy in the room is such that I start going back into my symmetry, my activation stuff. And this time I sure as shit suddenly felt like I was the conductor of a symphony. And so the energy in the room was palpable, and I start going into my, my movement, this combination of this figure 8 stuff and these Vedic mudra dance poses. But I'm not dancing, I'm actually physically in one spot. And I just feel the energy of the room like swimming around. And then all 3 of the other people in the ceremony start having these just deep, deep purges where they essentially all just start puking their guts out. And basically the gal that showed up, I didn't realize, but she was there synchronistically for some sort of life shit that she was going through, or some sort of relationship stuff where she had just had, I don't really assume to know the exact details, but it felt to me like perhaps she had had some horrible breakup and she was just knotted up inside and depressed. And so when you're in these medicine spaces and you physically purge, you're physically purging in physical form your mental back stuff, right? Like your mental back baggage. So I'm doing this symmetry poses while the 3 of them start puking their guts out. And she just kept puking and puking and puking, way more than the contents of her stomach, and just kept saying, thank you, thank you, thank you. Like, this is what I came for. This is what I was here for.
Wow.
Right? And so I'm thinking like the energy of the room is coming up out of them, and I'm doing some sort of conducting of like channeling the energy of the room. And to talk about grounding and earthing, when I did the medicine on the beach, I had no shoes on, right? And we know the important connections of sun gazing and having your feet connected to the soil.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a major, I would never do a sacrament without being in nature or without having my shoes off, because of the deep, respect that gives to the medicine. And because I felt like when I was in that vortex, I felt like then my feet became like the branches of a root system of a tree, where then the energy is going down back into Gaia and Mother Earth. So I'm feeling in this experience like I had my shoes off, even though we were inside, that I'm pushing this life shit that these people had, which was just floating around the room. Through the symmetry, through this conducting, I'm channeling this energy down into my body and pushing it down back into the earth. So like the earth will take it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so this is maybe a shamanic healing component that I have secretly discovered within myself. Right. Mm-hmm. So this could be ancient stuff that like we don't even know exists. And like Rack says on the show, it's like we have 7 billion people on the planet. So we essentially need 70 million shamans working today to basically help heal the planet from all of our shit. Maybe I've found that this is another element to my life's work, that I might be a potential. It doesn't feel like my primary thing. I think maybe, I'm pretty decent at the filmmaking, but maybe there is this kind of element to this symmetry where it is able to channel energy and do things, because I've had now 2 experiences synchronistically where it's proved useful in very beneficial ways. First time to me, and then the second time to others. So, you talk about finding your true calling. I mean, I don't know if maybe that's an element to that, but as the puzzle goes on and as, life is discovered more, I might discover, more things with this.
I was just thinking that while you were talking, that I thought, okay, so you've not had a big purging, but you seem to be a hugely powerful conduit, and it might be something that maybe, it's just interesting. Maybe that's a thing for you. Maybe that's something you're naturally gifted with. Just through the story, it sounded like that.
Yeah, maybe. And a lot of people go into these experiences, like a lot of people feel the call, feel the call to go drink ayahuasca or something because they've had some bad life upbringing or some trauma. And so there's a healing element to it, right? Where it's like people get huge healings out of it and can be amazing benefit to their healing. But for me, it's like I had a pretty good upbringing. And of course I had to deprogram myself as much as a lot of us and had to burn down my tower a bit. But I feel like most of my profound experiences now, especially these two being the two most profound experiences, weren't healings, but more revealings. So this seems to me like it's beyond a psychedelic experience. It seems like it's like a leap in evolution. So as people feel the call to these things, I think there's a reason why they feel the call, because it's like the Gaian mother is telling everybody to get in touch with these plants, because these plants are millions of years older than us. And they basically are like, hey, you dumb monkeys, like, let me show you a thing or two, right? Let me show you more about the fabric of what reality really is. So this is going to be an ongoing running joke with me from now on. It's like, how long does it take Niles to bring up the toad in a conversation?
But what's really interesting is I've never really been not seriously attracted to ayahuasca, but since the first day I heard about the toad, that's a different story.
Yeah. Yeah, and you have to think about that, right? It's the same as like as our mutual friend told you to question the spatial model. You felt something in that, and you can speak to only what you feel, right? And so
absolutely, yeah,
absolutely,
yeah. I don't know, and I don't think that listening to, because I've heard the detail just completely blows me away, and that you remember it so absolutely clearly. It's just so vivid. Your experiences are incredibly vivid. When I think about that, I say to myself, wow, if this is essentially an experience of light, then that is something I would like to do.
Yeah. Elf's going to go get her light units like instantly blasted. Let me just end this with a little something else that Hal wrote, just so you can see that. Again, you'll search Temple of Awakening Divinity online and you get like, some real misinformation there. I mean, like the third link talks about how it's like Jim Jones style cult, which is not true. And so it's like you need to, these things are not perfect, of course, and they have their struggles. And it's just gotten its like 501c3 status as it's trying to be like a traveling road show to have these experiences to really allow people to be benefited and have these amazing healing experiences. And these things are so profound that it's like you hold them so close to your heart and cherish them so deeply that it's like you can't help but just feel like they're like one of the most memorable fireworks lighting up. They just light you up so much that you will always cherish them forever. That's something that with these people that I've had these experiences around, it's like they'll forever be my, comrades in arms and like dear friends. So, Hal is certainly somebody that I spent one weekend with, and I'll never forget his influence on me. Let me read what he wrote as we wrap this up. It says, within the context of our spiritual praxis, it is this dissolution of the egoic principle that allows our individuated consciousness to merge directly with Source, recognizing itself as infinite, meaning immeasurable without boundary, ineffable, meaning no effective way to really be described in language, and eternal, meaning ceaseless and without beginning or ending with the normally recognized constructs of space and time. The experience of Source itself is therefore limitless, atemporal, non-spatial, and ultimately indescribable, and yet leaves the indelible and undeniable imprint within our awaking human consciousness. Consequently, as awareness once again becomes identifiable, mortality of our embodied human condition, as we regenerate from that dissolution, a deep and abiding sense of compassion rises from the utter preciousness of what it is to be human and for the temporality of our physical existence. There is an intensely profound recognition and feelings of gratitude that arise in overwhelming appreciation for the love and perfection of Source consciously choosing to embody itself in us, to experience physical existence through us in order that we may come to know itself as other, as to be beloved. It is this dynamic sense of realization of the fragility and preciousness of what it is to be a human being that fully allows us to embody the love of Source as self-love. Let us dive once more into that boundless beyond. Yeah. And
I like it.
And that's the thing, it's like you have these experiences and you melt into what, he's talking about Source a lot. And so there's this commonality, like I talked about those steps Octavia lays down, where you melt into that Source feeling and you realize that you are part of that and that, you are an infinite being. That's such an empowering thing and such a love-based thing that you can't help but cherish that. So, and this is what it's all about. I mean, this is the goods. This is like real deal amazing stuff. So, thank you, Rack. Thank you, Octavio.
Yeah.
Thank you, Hal. Thank you, Wise Roundtable of Mystical Women, for listening.
Deep bow of respect to Lazarus.
Rushing tunnel of light, and each bead is a frozen liquid angel, a condensed vibrational being, another drop in the cosmic ocean all around. And the angels are alive, they pulse with welcoming light love, they caress and become me as I enter the 5MEO DMT space, and everything becomes infused with holiness, with the sacredness beyond words. This is what the saints say, what the enlightened ones experience, the lower bardos and the shores of the heavenly realms. And all I have to communicate it are these poor words, these little ninos. They are but shadows of the thing, for the experience is translinguistic. Underneath their semantic skin are vibrational wavelengths that attach to the essence of the thing that is named. The vehicle of the word is like a freshly minted wave packet to contain energies that are burst open here. As I swim through, become one with the core, the source of all things, the Logos, the word that creates, and pure creation itself. I cross over to the other side where the angels live, where all spirit and energy is manifesting on different levels, the 50,000 veils of Maya and Sufi myth, the infinite masks of God. And as I let the Logos in, I embrace the onrushing divinity, and I let it fill me, become me, until I'm swimming, becoming like a dolphin cutting through the water. Yet the water is me, and there is no separation from it. It's all it. It's all sound that manifests as light, and it wraps around me as the caterpillar leaves the hammock cocoon and becomes the cosmic butterfly. Over there, a dimensional frequency away, a raging torrent is flowing that is the source of all things. 1 billion feelings are all stored within the holographic matrix of my DNA, and as I join the vibrational matrix of the source, it not just polishes the hologrammatic lens, it unlocks the chakras to unleash all my memories and emotions. I'm being read like a book, and the reader is God, the Logos, the thing with as many names as there are namers. It reads my stored memories, and they cascade around me like a flower in bloom. The spirits caress me and laugh with me, and as I get that flash of recognition that I've felt these things before, the spirits say, "Sí, amigo, yes," and they laugh and they lift me higher. They sing their secret songs, and I smile and I remember and become and feel, and all of this in the touch of that one word, spirit. All of this hyper-condensed into each single crystalline moment, reflecting the glory of God in the molecular rainfall of my journey. hologrammatic code, hologrammatic, grammatic, grammar, the word of God. We're in the word, and the word is a sound, a vibration. And the more I don't fight it, the more I let go and embrace it, a living logos that incarnates within, all at God's speed, smearing like a camel through the eye of a needle. A timeless state ensues, and I'm wrapped in this being, and I am this being, and I always have been. And in this state, all is one, is one, is one, is one, is one, forever and ever. And the visual hieroglyphics and the colors and kaleidoscope patterns wrap themselves around me, and each one is another layer of this being, multiple strands of consciousness. The Logos is a modulating waveform made up of layers of vibrational sentience all overlapping with me, creating a ripple-like interference pattern, and I can feel every molecule in my being vibrating at the same time, singing a song of joy. Molecular rainfall all around, sentient superstrings, showering space love, unity, unity, unity. I am it, and it is you. We are one. And this goes on forever. And the whole time I'm melting and hurtling and blossoming and becoming and caressed by spirits and angels and coming holographic chakra blossoms totally transdimensional till I lose myself and there is no me left to remember separation. I'm drowning in it, back in the dreaming universe. My heart chakra opens like an eye to the sun and drinks in its energy essence. This timeless world of spirit wraps itself around me like a cloak of eternity that goes on forever in all directions, beyond words now, in the word now. And I can feel the spirits, they caress me, they hold me, they teach me how to swim and breathe, and they whisper their icaros to help me navigate those vibrational patterns that create cosmic ballast. I am at play in the fields of the Lord, swimming with the spirits. After some time, a memory of being other returns. And like a deep-sea scuba diver, I struggle to return to the surface. Even though I can't remember who I am or what it is I'm trying to do, a feeling remains that I've done something. This is it. I've done something I can't come back from. This is what it must like to be dead, lost in the current of the source and merging back to the 0 point, unanchored from the body. But I'm just visiting. I'm bungee jumping the lower bardos, and just as I can't remember I'm an I feel the pressure of being a million miles from home, and the call of the other that is I begins. I fall out of pure unity and start descending back the cosmic ladder to the matter world below. Re-entry begins. The spirits rejoice, they caress and sing to me on the way back down. They play with me and guide me back to my body. Their icaros are hologrammatic tools that carve me back into the right shape to fit my flesh. They pat me back down into myself, back into the I. It feels like being born. I feel an immense grace, like the shadow of God is in the room with us, the energy thread of the hologram, the great spirit that connects us all. And this grace rubs off. It's shining through every living thing, every person, every sound. It's all in on the game we're playing down here. And I know this in a truth beyond words. As real as my breath, no illusions, the veil is lifted. There is a translinguistic thread that connects all life in the language of the gods. And when the birds hear it, they sing. The spirits whisper it, the thunder echoes it back. And they're all talking, all connected. And I can hear them in my head and make sense of it, and there's no end to it. You send out a signal, and the jungle responds with its cry. This is the hologrammatic universe science dreams of, made flesh, visible, manifest, booming right back at you. And everyone is talking, but I can hear, feel the words, and the energy is like a billion levels of Photoshop wrapped around me. But God is the picture, yeah? And all these layers of reality are threads I can pull and make words to know. And it's all sentient, and it's all holy, holy, holy God, most sacred of spaces. The raw holiness of creation is still right here now. Nature calls and wraps me in her. The animals sing back because they hear the signal I'm giving off. The floorboards creak in expectation. The night whispers its secrets. And I know it, and I am it, and everything is language. It's all alive, and now I know it's grammar, the secret language of nature. God speaks through me, and the word is made flesh. And I'm so happy that I've come back, because I'd forgotten I could come back, that I was separate from the all. And knowing that I can come back means that I can also return. Not only do these other spaces exist, but we can travel to them and return safely. The hyper-condensed black hole of space-time love that is the source, it can be integrated, it can be downloaded, the idea of it can be brought back.